All right, welcome back. MD101, part two, distress and dysfunction. Short little series of videos that I'm making to just sort of explain the basic aspects of maladaptive daydreaming. Last time we went over the definition of MD, sort of, you know, just the bare bones. What is it? The next part will be going over content, but this part is about distress and dysfunction. I can't believe that worked. I didn't expect it to actually go up there. I should have done that for my last video. I hope I remember to do it for the next one. I'm really bad at continuity. Anyway, so the takeaway from the last part was that what really sets maladaptive daydreaming apart from other types of daydreaming is the negative impact on the life, the maladaptive nature of it, the distress and dysfunction. Distress and dysfunction is a word combo that you're going to see a lot in mental health spaces because that is what is required for something to be considered a disorder. And like we mentioned in the last episode, maladaptive daydreaming isn't an official disorder or anything, but currently researchers of maladaptive daydreaming are kind of conceptualizing it and treating it as such. And they've made a proposed diagnostic criteria, and they've found things that they think really point to it being its own disorder. We'll see how that pans out for them, but I'm going to try to treat it the same way that the people researching it are. And they are using language and definitions that are in step with the DSM. I think I have a video on maladaptive daydreaming and the DSM. It's the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. That's what it's called, right? I'm having doubts now. I know what it's called, but I'm doubting myself. Hold on, I'm going to look it up. Yeah, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. I was right. Don't worry. I'm on point here. Anyway, so yeah, whenever in the future, in the past, whenever you're seeing me at least use the term that MD is a disorder, just kind of in your mind, just put like a proposed in parentheses right there and what the DSM says. And the requirement from something like the DSM for something to be a disorder is it has to cause distress or dysfunction to the person in their life. If you're fine with it, you're fine with it. Nobody else can tell you how to live your life. If it's not a problem for you, it's not a problem for you. There's no reason that you would have to get into the mindset of I am disordered if something, even if it's abnormal, is a positive influence on your life. Same with maladaptive daydreaming. If it's not affecting you negatively, you might want to call yourself an immersive daydreamer instead. That's up to you. I don't know your life, but maladaptive is going to imply a maladaptation. And if you don't have that, you might want a different term. Now, also, like I said in the last one, the the daydreams, they're not like intrusive thoughts, they're not distressing thoughts. The daydreams themselves are usually something that the daydreamer really likes or loves to engage in, or even if they don't actively love them, they're at least fulfilling some sort of probably emotional need that keeps the daydreamer returning to them again and again and again. The parallel that we draw is with something like drugs or alcohol or food, other types of addiction where, you know, something like heroin feels great. Getting a buzz on feels nice. Food tastes good. It's the other aspects of that relationship that are the terrible part. The physical symptoms, the mental toll that it takes, the alienation, the urges, the withdrawal, all those things are what make that object of addiction or obsession or compulsion really, really bad. That's where the distress comes from. So in maladaptive daydreaming, the distress we're going to pull from Bigelson and Shupak 2011, a paper that I will link below. This is the first paper that really kind of outlined the sources of distress and dysfunction for a maladaptive daydreamer. And they split it into three categories: time, control, shame. For the purposes of this video, I'm adding a fourth. We're going to talk about the crash, which is essentially withdrawal. Ah, actually wouldn't really call it withdrawal. I guess it could be. We'll get to it. So here's our first source of distress: time. Citing my source again, Bigelson Shupak 2011, down in the description. Which I want you to know because I'm about to say a bunch of statistics and I don't want you to think I'm making them up. Now, this paper, hold on, let me find it. Let me get it in front of me. I don't know why I didn't do that before. All right, so this paper that we're citing, Bigelson Shupak 2011, is called Compulsive Fantasy, with the subtitle Proposed Evidence for an Underreported Mental Disorder, Underreported Syndrome through a Systematic Study of 90 Self-Identified Non-Normative Fantasizers. Linked below. Again, want you to know what it is because I'm about to say a bunch of statistics, and this is where they come from. Not just making them up. Another thing to point out about this paper is it doesn't use the word maladaptive daydreaming. It says non-normative fantasizers. At this point, they were kind of thinking maladaptive daydreaming was a weird name, and they actually wanted to rename it to compulsive fantasy. That didn't take. We're still called maladaptive daydreaming. It's called daydreaming disorder, parentheses, maladaptive daydreaming. But for a hot second, they were considering compulsive fantasy because I thought that was more descriptive. Point is, I'm not certain that all of the people being described in this would describe themselves as maladaptive daydreamers. So I think these numbers have some wiggle room. Okay, now what they found is about 60% of the population that they were studying said that they feel remorse, I believe is the term used, remorse over not attending to things in their real life because they're spending so much time in their fantasy. They're saying in this paper, the sample that they're studying is saying that they're spending, again, almost, well, about 56% of their time in active, elaborate, maladaptive daydream. Um, I don't know why I did that because they don't say that in the paper. This sample that they're studying is saying that they're spending about 50% of their time in active, elaborate fantasizing. So this isn't mind wandering. It's not, to-do lists or what if I said this to my boss or that barista is hot. It's not the idle thoughts that come in and out while you're washing the dishes or whatever. This is active fantasy building. And this led to about a quarter of the sample feeling truly socially impaired. They said that they believe that they are perceived as completely normal by an outside observer, but that outside observer sort of can't see the balancing act that they're doing, doesn't see all the time that they're away from the world. And even when they are seen by others, they might not actually be there. Very sad, like 9 or 10% of this sample said they don't have any friends. They don't have any meaningful relationships. And even the ones who didn't report that kind of severity, the ones who said they had normal lives, they still said that they preferred to spend their time in the fantasy world. And they would put off other things or they would do this mentally exhausting balancing act to make it all work out because they needed it. They needed the time to daydream, and it threw their whole life out of whack. That's about all I have to say about time. Leave any questions below, by the way. I don't know if I can answer them, but I'll try. All right. And our next section, control. I was so pleased. Now, like I said before, maladaptive daydreamers do tend to enjoy their daydreamings. They get something out of it, but they still get upset over that loss of control. They can't control when things are really going to start, how long they're going to stay in it. And that doesn't mean that they're always just happening. Yes, they are a lot of the time sort of just happening. You sort of train your brain to go into that fantasy whenever you're not, actively engaged in something else. That will happen anyway. It's called the default mode network. You can look that up. Mind watering is sort of the default of your brain. It doesn't just shut off and go blank when you're not actively thinking about something. It wanders. It's completely normal. So you are already, just by being human, prone to your mind wandering when you're not engaged in something else. And maladaptive daydreamers will sort of train their brain to not just wander idly, but to go into one of their fantasies. So it will just happen. And once you're in it, because it's so absorptive, it can be hard to get out. So you can't really control when you come out of it either all the time. And even if you do, you might, get the withdrawal type symptoms, the urges and stuff to continue or to get back to it. And that is another part of the control because sometimes it doesn't just turn on. Like sometimes a maladaptive daydreamer will purposefully go into a daydream. They controlled that. They made the decision that they were going to do that. But the problem is that they can't really control the urge to create the fantasy or the need to go into it. You might think of like a smoker who they know the consequences, they know that it's bad for them. They may even want to quit, but they still make that active choice to find their lighter, put on their coat, go outside to the porch, and light their cigarette. Like they controlled that action, but they couldn't control themselves, the urge. Now, that's smoking's different, it's that's a physical addiction to nicotine, but just to kind of to give you an idea of what I mean by they can't control their urge. This paper found that quarter about of the people that they interviewed actually used parallels to addiction. And I think this is maybe where the idea that MD is a behavioral addiction started to form. That didn't come out of nowhere. We said it. Like I mean, a lot of us in studies, when we talked to researchers and psychologists, we were using terms um, like addiction to describe what we were feeling. And they were like, oh, okay, let's look into that. And it comes complete with those withdrawal like symptoms, which I think we'll probably talk about more in a second in the crash part. And then, they also found with control that about like 80%, like a lot, most of the people said that they had tried to control their daydreaming, but they kept failing. And remember, this was in 2011. This was before MD was really known. So I hope that this number has gone down in the years that maladaptive daydreaming has been known and more studied and more awareness and more information about it has, been put out there on the internet. But back then when these people were being interviewed, uh, nobody knew what maladaptive daydreaming was. Nobody knew the language that um, they needed to use to describe themselves accurately. If they went to a therapist, like they weren't sure what to say. It was hard for them to be understood, and there was no understanding of where it was coming from or what it was. So there was definitely no understanding of the things that you could do to address or treat it. Um, so yeah, that's a really huge number of people who tried and just kept failing, and that led to a lot of distress when they actively tried and they failed and they just realized how absolutely out of control it was. They got scared. That is a scary, distressing thing to learn and makes one ashamed. Shame was the third major contributing factor that this paper found. This paper found that most maladaptive daydreamers, or what was it, like non-normative fantasizers, went out of their way to hide their daydreaming. And I think this has been backed up in other papers. I'm not going to go look. You can if you want. I'll link the ICMDR down below. But they go out of their way to hide it. They don't know. MDers don't typically talk about their maladaptive daydreaming in real life. The internet can give the false impression that we are really vocal about our fantasies, but that's through the anonymity of the internet. In real life, we haven't historically tended to talk about it with other people. I hope that's changing. As people, have a language to describe themselves with, they can maybe talk to therapists about it in a more effective way, and not be scared to bring it up because they don't know how to explain it. And hopefully, with just mental health awareness in general, with society changing to look more kindly on that, hopefully people will be able to be more open about everything. I mean, not just this, but hopefully nobody in the future will have to be scared of coming out to their family about mental health issues. But it is what it is right now. It may be changing, but at least when this was done in 2011, which wasn't that long ago, people were scared and they would hide it and they wouldn't tell anybody about it. They were ashamed of it. They were embarrassed by it. They were afraid of what other people would think of them. And that is extremely isolating. Perhaps especially as you get older and you really want to settle into long-term relationships of your own choosing, with a partner, perhaps. Maladaptive daydreaming is such, like we went over in time, like it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of mental energy, and we're deeply attached generally to our daydream worlds and characters. And that is a big part of yourself to hide from a partner. And not just from a partner, but from anyone else that you care about or want to share yourself with. It's very isolating. Shame also comes in with the invalidation, which I also hope is on the decline, but I don't know. Every once in a while, you'll still see people saying like, "Oh, I went to my therapist," and they just said, "Oh, you're creative." That creates a sense of shame as well. Like, I mean, this is the professional, and they're telling me this thing isn't a problem. So if I feel that it's a problem in me and it's not the actual problem, then there's something wrong with me. Why can't I deal with this normal thing? And then there is this other aspect to shame that, in addition to being sort of in hiding about it or embarrassed by it, in addition to sort of feeling a little crazy about it when other people are like, "What are you talking about? That's not a big deal." There's also that we do love it, and it's often idolized, idealized, idea. The hard that word is so hard to say without making it sound like idol, like a anyway. These worlds are often idealized, and a lot of maladaptive daydreamers, not all, but a lot, will form strong bonds to their characters. Obviously, these aren't real world bonds, but they're emotional bonds, and emotions are real. So it's real to you, real enough anyway. You're having a real, actual emotional reaction to it. And that can upset your real life when reality just isn't like that. In your daydreams, you can have a very deep and meaningful bond with your best friend. And in real life, your best friend is kind of a douche that you don't even really like that much. There's a very large disconnect between what friendship is or what friendship you have and what friendship should be and what you should be aspiring to. And why can't you have something like that in reality? And then, why am I expecting my best friend to be like some ideal character that I made up? That's not fair to them. They're a real person with their own wants and needs and inner world. And you can't expect someone else to live to a standard of perfection that you set in your fantasies. So you feel ashamed for comparing the two as well. Why can't I love people, real people, the way that I love character? Why can't I form a close bond with a real human being? I have to do it with Hermione Granger, Why can't I form a deep and meaningful bond with another person? What's wrong with me? That kind of shame. So so the last one we're gonna go over is the crash. We're just gonna touch on that real quick. But I also want to bring up like these are just like the three big ones that came up in this paper. There are other things that are, considered part of dysfunction or distress. People have trouble sleeping, for example. They have physical issues, pacers and stuff, blowing their knees out or breaking their ankles or whatever pacers do. Tinnitus. Um, so I don't want you to think these are the only places distress and dysfunction come from. They're just the big ones that we're going over. Anyway, last one, crash. Very common thing for maladaptive daydreamers to go through. It's basically the term we use to describe sort of the afterglow of maladaptive daydreaming, but it's not really a glow. It's more of a seeping malignant ooze. Now, it's going to vary from individual to individual, but it's negative feelings that come up when you're not daydreaming. especially after like a big binge or something. So it may be shame, like we just talked about before. Why did I put off all this stuff that I was supposed to do? I'm a bad friend. I'm a bad person. I'm, lazy and horrible, and I should have been doing this. But I sunk all my time into daydreaming. I'm totally out of control. Throwback to bring in our other topics. And, like in the shame section before, there's also that disconnect between the fantasy where you can experience really deep emotions with things that you're connected to, and then coming back to reality and not feeling that, feeling actually really disconnected from where you are, feeling like you don't belong here. It's just gross, it's dull, it's awful, and there's not even anything you can do about it. So it's just a miserable experience to even, be awake. The symptoms can be physical. They can cause you anxiety or depression or something like that. You will often also feel the urge to return to your daydream quickly, probably to ease those negative feelings. So you sort of get caught in this negative feedback loop where you feel bad, so you daydream, and then y- you feel bad because you're daydreaming, so you stop daydreaming, but then you feel really bad, so you go back to daydreaming, and it just sort of cycles through. Ugh, it's a spiral that's kind of hard to break out of. But it is really worth it because what I want to say really with the crash is that no matter how you're experiencing it, it is temporary. You can get through those negative feelings and you can start to work on your reality. Once you get back to reality, it's not actually as miserable. You just need to reacclimate to it because the like here, we're going to draw a graph. So right, so you start out maybe here, and then we're daydreaming and we feel really, really good. And then we're like, oh wait, maybe I should like stop daydreaming. That's the crash. But then, you know, you'll come up out of that. You just gotta get through it. And then you'll notice, oh, okay, reality's actually all right. I feel like a real professor. I have a whiteboard and everything. Anyway, that's gonna do it for this episode of MD101, Distress and Dysfunction. Those are the major places that distress and dysfunction can come from. There are, like I said, a lot of other sources for this. A lot of other things that are gonna pop up, but these are the big main ones, and they're definitely the ones that you can um, go read about in the thing down below the paper, Pulse of Fantasy. I encourage you to read a lot of the papers on the ICMDR, also linked below. They're going to back up and elaborate on a lot of this stuff that we just went over. Anyway, next installment will be content. And no, I have no idea when I'm actually going to post it. I'm very sorry if you're following along in real time. So I will see you eventually.